April 19th, 7:06 a.m., Asheville, North Carolina. I tapped my card at the pharmacy to pay for a simple bottle of blood pressure medication. The terminal blinked once, then flashed an angry red message I had never seen in my life. Account empty, $0, 00, authorized transfer by Evan Mitchell. For a moment I just stared at it, as if the screen might apologize and correct itself. Yesterday, that same account held $14,870, the money I'd saved slowly, carefully, for the roof repair before summer storms. I stepped outside into the chilly April air, my hands trembling just enough to make the pill bottle rattle in the bag. I called my son, Evan, because who else could make sense of this? Instead of a ring, an automated voice answered. The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable. International travel restrictions apply. My breath caught. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again, an email notification. An invoice opened automatically. 2 plane tickets to Paris. Paid in full. With my account. I sat down on the bench outside the pharmacy, feeling the cold metal through my coat. How could they do this to me? I whispered, though no one was near enough to hear. If these stories feel a little too familiar, you're not alone. Subscribe and stay with the voices that turn silence into strength. My name is Caroline Mitchell, and I am 62 years old. I say my age plainly now, because my life has been one long exercise in carrying things other people were afraid would break. I spent 4 decades as a structural engineer, reading blueprints and calculating loads, making sure that what other people built could actually stand. Entire buildings stood because I double-checked the math. After my husband, Daniel, died 20 years ago in a rain-slick car accident on I-40, I raised our son alone. I learned how to balance grief and groceries, tax forms and school forms, bedtime stories and budget spreadsheets. There was no backup plan, no second parent waiting in the wings. Just me, my boy, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator at night. I have a modest but stable pension now. My home, a small 2-story craftsman on the edge of Asheville, is fully paid off. I know the year every part of it was built, every renovation, every crack that needs watching. The porch boards still creak in the same spots they did when Evan was 10 and ran out for the school bus with his shoelaces untied. I have always taken pride in being reliable, the person who shows up on time, who keeps lists, who pays what she owes before it is even due. My reputation, until recently, was simple, dependable Caroline. At work, they knew I would stay late to check one more calculation. In the neighborhood, they knew I kept spare keys for anyone who locked themselves out, and a toolbox that could fix almost anything. Reliability became my identity, like a coat I wore without thinking. Evan grew up in the shadow of that reliability. My only child, my late-in-life miracle. He is 33 now, handsome in a way that has always opened doors for him, with dark hair that flops into his eyes and a smile that gets him out of parking tickets. As a teenager, he could charm his teachers into extending deadlines, and as an adult, he has tried to charm reality itself. In the last 3 years alone, Evan has chosen 6 different careers. First he was going to be a photographer, then a real estate agent, then a digital marketer, then a podcaster, then a crypto consultant, and finally something involving brand storytelling. Each new dream came with its own jargon, its own expensive course, and its own promise that this time, everything would finally click. Responsibility, though, never seemed to make it onto his vision boards. I used to tell myself he simply needed time to find his path, that the world was different now, that careers no longer followed the straight lines I had known. When he moved back home, for a few months to reset, I believed him. I cleared out the guest room and folded fresh towels, telling myself this was what mothers did. I did not yet understand that his idea of reset meant rearranging my life so he could avoid rearranging his own. Riley arrived 2 months later, rolling her suitcase across my hardwood floors as if they already belonged to her. She introduced herself as a life coach, influencer, and energy expert. She wore long linen dresses and bracelets that clicked softly when she moved her hands. Her voice was smooth, practiced, the kind people learn from filming themselves on their phones. From the beginning, Riley spoke in phrases that sounded almost meaningful until you tried to pin them down. She believed the universe responded to high-frequency generosity. She talked about abundance, manifestation, and how money was just energy that needed to flow. She said my careful saving made my energy stagnant. I listened politely, stirring my tea, feeling the weight of my old ceramic mug in my hand. At first, I tried to see the best in her. Evan looked at her the way he had once looked at the ocean as a child, wide-eyed, dazzled, convinced it could never turn on him. She laughed at his jokes, kissed his cheek in my kitchen, and told me, "You raised such a sensitive, gifted man, Caroline." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that all his false starts might settle into something solid with her by his side. But slowly, little comments began to land like pebbles dropped into a glass. Harmless, individually. Loud, collectively. Riley would glance around my living room and say, "You know, you could really monetize this space as a content studio." She would run her fingers along my bookshelves and remark, "All this old stuff is kind of heavy. No wonder the energy in here feels stuck." She had an answer for everything, especially when it came to why I should help them. When Evan hesitated to ask for money, Riley would step in, smiling. "You know, Caroline, the universe rewards generosity. Especially from elders. It's like ancestral abundance. What you give returns to you tenfold." She said it so gently that, for a while, I almost believed that disagreeing would make me small-minded. They stayed in my house rent-free. At first it was just for a month or two while they built Riley's brand. Then it was until a course finished. Then it was until they hit a certain follower count. 11 months later, they were still there, their shoes in my hallway, their coffee cups on my counter, their plans always just about to take off. Meanwhile, my grocery bill doubled, my utility bills crept upward, and my patience thinned. I kept telling myself that this was temporary, that I was helping them launch a new life. I told myself that this was what family did, especially after everything Evan and I had been through. I had survived widowhood, single motherhood, and long nights at a drafting table. Surely I could survive a bit of noise and clutter while my son found his way. What I failed to see was how my reliability had turned into something else in their eyes. Not a blessing. Not a safety net. A resource. A reservoir they assumed would never run dry. I did not yet realize that the people I loved most were testing how much weight I could bear before I finally cracked. I believed I could cope. The first crack didn't come as a shout or a slammed door. It arrived quietly, the way small fractures always do, barely visible until you look back and realize they were the beginning of everything. It was a Thursday evening, the kind that smelled of rosemary chicken drifting from the oven and warm dishwater settling in the sink. I was setting plates on the counter, humming softly to myself, when I heard Riley's voice from the living room. Soft, low, but not soft enough. "She's stuck in the past," she whispered. "Honestly, Evan, it might be time to move her into something smaller." The fork slipped from my hand and clinked against the drawer divider. Just loud enough to betray me. Their conversation cut off at once, cleanly, guiltily, the way people stop talking when they know the person they're discussing is close enough to hear. I stood still for a moment, staring at the oven door. My reflection stared back, a woman in her 60s, holding a dish towel and pretending she hadn't just heard her son's girlfriend planning a future that didn't include her. When I walked into the living room, they were both sitting too casually on the couch, Evan bent over his laptop, Riley scrolling her phone with exaggerated nonchalance. Neither looked up. Neither greeted me. The air felt staged. "Dinner's ready," I said quietly. "Great," Riley answered without lifting her eyes. "We'll be there in a minute." I nodded, though neither of them saw. Back in the kitchen, I finished setting the table slowly, listening to the soft buzz of their whispered conversation restarting once they believed I was far enough away. That night at dinner, Riley launched into one of her long, pleasant monologues about releasing attachments to outdated environments. Evan nodded along, like he always did when he didn't fully understand what she was saying but didn't want to disappoint her. I smiled politely, cut my chicken, and kept my thoughts to myself. But something inside me shifted that evening. Not cracked open yet, but loosened, like a screw threading dangerously toward the edge. Later, after loading the dishes into the washer, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. The house was quiet, but not in the peaceful way it used to be. The quiet felt watchful now, full of corners where unfamiliar intentions waited. I replayed her sentence, move her into something smaller. My house, the home where Evan took his first steps, where Daniel hung the baby monitor, where birthdays and storms and repairs and quiet mornings had filled 22 years, had been reduced in her mind to an inefficient container. Something to be optimized. Cleared. Downsized. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. That maybe she hadn't meant it literally. Maybe it was just careless talk from someone who lived in abstractions and vision boards. But later that week, when I came downstairs early for tea, Riley appeared behind me and murmured, "Please don't make noise this early. It throws off our energy." As if I were a guest intruding in her rented world. And the seed of that first crack began to sprout into something darker. Looking back now, I see that evening clearly. It was the first moment I felt the floor shift beneath me, a subtle imbalance, like stepping on a stair that isn't where it should be. A warning. A whisper of the betrayal that was already forming. I wish I could say that after that evening, I woke up and laid down firm rules. The truth is quieter, and more embarrassing. I did what many mothers do when their children brush up against their limits. I minimized it. I told myself Riley was just talking, Evan was just confused, and I was just tired. But the house felt different after that. The next morning, I woke before dawn as usual, padding down the hallway in my old blue robe. I like the early hours, when the fridge hums steadily and the first light pushes against the kitchen window. I filled the kettle, set my favorite mug, the chipped white one with the faded red cardinal, under the cabinet light and reached for the radio. I had just turned it on, low, when Riley appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of Evan's sweatshirts. "Caroline," she said, squinting, "could you not make so much noise in the mornings? I'm really sensitive right after I wake up. It throws off my energy for the whole day." The radio was barely above a whisper. The kettle had not yet boiled. I stood there, my hand still on the knob. "This is my usual routine," I said. "I'm not trying to be loud." She smiled then, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "I know, and we're so grateful to be here. It's just, maybe you could be a bit more mindful. Evan and I do deep work in the mornings. We need the house really still. Mindful. Still. My own kitchen, my own mornings, suddenly framed as an intrusion. After that, I began announcing myself before entering rooms that were once simply mine. If I needed something from the living room and they were filming a video, I hovered in the hallway until Riley said, "It's okay, you can cross now," as if she were a traffic cop directing my movement in my own home. If Evan had his headphones on at the dining room table, I would clear my throat and wait for him to look up before I opened a drawer. The thermostat became its own battleground. I have always kept the house at 68 in winter and 74 in summer. It's what my budget allows, and what my body prefers. Riley, however, believed that cold blocks energy flow. One afternoon in January, I came home from the grocery store and felt it the second I stepped inside, a heavy, artificial warmth wrapping the house. I dropped the bags on the counter, checked the thermostat, and saw 78 degrees glowing back at me. "Riley?" I called. "Why is the heat up so high?" She appeared from the hallway with a blanket around her shoulders. "Oh, I adjusted it. My coach says warmth supports creativity. You wouldn't believe how many breakthroughs I've had since I started keeping myself cozy." "My heating bill believes it," I said. I tried to keep my voice light, but the number on the last invoice tugged at me. "We can't keep it this high all the time. It's expensive." She sighed, a small, impatient sound. "Money is just energy, Caroline. It has to flow to come back. You've been holding on so tightly for so long. Maybe that's why you're having these health issues." Blood rushed in my ears. My blood pressure, the very reason I needed that medication, became a casual prop in her philosophy. Then there was the car. I had started letting Evan use my old Subaru for errands while they were building their business. Soon the keys lived on his nightstand more often than in the bowl by the door. He would take the car for meetings and return hours later, music still echoing faintly from the speakers, the fuel gauge hovering near empty. One evening, I needed to drive to choir practice. I grabbed my coat, reached for the keys, and found the bowl empty. Evan answered his phone on speaker, laughter in his voice. "Oh, hey, Mom. Yeah, I've got the car. Riley and I had to run out to shoot some content at the Overlook. The light is insane right now. Can you just skip tonight? It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal to me," I said. "Choir is on the calendar. I asked you this morning to have the car back by 5. "Okay, but you didn't say it like, super clearly," he replied. "I thought it was flexible." Flexible. That word again. My schedule, my commitments, my boundaries, everything's suddenly flexible, as long as it benefited them. The small dismissals piled up like unwashed dishes. They laughed about my old lady routines. They rolled their eyes when I asked them to rinse their plates or wipe the stove. When I mentioned my mother's china, Riley wrinkled her nose. "You know, all this heirloom stuff just weighs you down," she said. "You could sell it and invest in an online course. Imagine how much more expansive your life could be." I looked at the delicate plates my mother had wrapped in newspaper and carried from Ohio to North Carolina, piece by trembling piece. To Riley, they were just old junk. To Evan, increasingly, they looked like assets. I saw it in the way his gaze lingered on anything that might be resold. I began to feel like a guest in my own home. I moved more quietly. I apologized when doors creaked or cabinets clicked shut. Somewhere along the way, I stopped playing music while I cooked. The house, once full of small, ordinary sounds, grew tense and watchful. The worst part wasn't their behavior. It was my response to it. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that they were stressed, that the brand would take off soon and they would move out. I let their needs eclipse my comfort, inch by inch. I told myself I was being generous, supportive, modern. In reality, I was shrinking to fit a space they had already decided was too small for me. At night, lying in my bed under the same blue blanket I had pulled over Evan when he had fevers as a boy, I stared at the hairline crack in the ceiling above my dresser. I had been meaning to patch it for months. Instead, I watched it, the way I watched everything, calculating silently how much more strain it could take before the plaster began to fall. In the quiet, I finally admitted something was bending. I wish I could say that after that evening, I woke up and laid down firm rules. The truth is quieter, and more embarrassing. I did what many mothers do when their children brush up against their limits. I minimized it. I told myself Riley was just talking, Evan was just confused, and I was just tired. But the house felt different after that. The next morning, I woke before dawn as usual, padding down the hallway in my old blue robe. I like the early hours, when the fridge hums steadily and the first light pushes against the kitchen window. I filled the kettle, set my favorite mug, the chipped white one with the faded red cardinal, under the cabinet light and reached for the radio. I had just turned it on, low, when Riley appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of Evan's sweatshirts. "Caroline," she said, squinting, "could you not make so much noise in the mornings? I'm really sensitive right after I wake up. It throws off my energy for the whole day." The radio was barely above a whisper. The kettle had not yet boiled. I stood there, my hand still on the knob. "This is my usual routine," I said. "I'm not trying to be loud." She smiled then, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "I know, and we're so grateful to be here. It's just, maybe you could be a bit more mindful. Evan and I do deep work in the mornings. We need the house really still. Mindful. Still. My own kitchen, my own mornings, suddenly framed as an intrusion. After that, I began announcing myself before entering rooms that were once simply mine. If I needed something from the living room and they were filming a video, I hovered in the hallway until Riley said, "It's okay, you can cross now," as if she were a traffic cop directing my movement in my own home. If Evan had his headphones on at the dining room table, I would clear my throat and wait for him to look up before I opened a drawer. The thermostat became its own battleground. I have always kept the house at 68 in winter and 74 in summer. It's what my budget allows, and what my body prefers. Riley, however, believed that cold blocks energy flow. One afternoon in January, I came home from the grocery store and felt it the second I stepped inside, a heavy, artificial warmth wrapping the house. I dropped the bags on the counter, checked the thermostat, and saw 78 degrees glowing back at me. "Riley?" I called. "Why is the heat up so high?" She appeared from the hallway with a blanket around her shoulders. "Oh, I adjusted it. My coach says warmth supports creativity. You wouldn't believe how many breakthroughs I've had since I started keeping myself cozy." "My heating bill believes it," I said. I tried to keep my voice light, but the number on the last invoice tugged at me. "We can't keep it this high all the time. It's expensive." She sighed, a small, impatient sound. "Money is just energy, Caroline. It has to flow to come back. You've been holding on so tightly for so long. Maybe that's why you're having these health issues." Blood rushed in my ears. My blood pressure, the very reason I needed that medication, became a casual prop in her philosophy. Then there was the car. I had started letting Evan use my old Subaru for errands while they were building their business. Soon the keys lived on his nightstand more often than in the bowl by the door. He would take the car for meetings and return hours later, music still echoing faintly from the speakers, the fuel gauge hovering near empty. One evening, I needed to drive to choir practice. I grabbed my coat, reached for the keys, and found the bowl empty. Evan answered his phone on speaker, laughter in his voice. "Oh, hey, Mom. Yeah, I've got the car." Riley and I had to run out to shoot some content at the Overlook. "The light is insane right now. Can you just skip tonight?" "It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal to me," I said. "Choir is on the calendar. I asked you this morning to have the car back by 5. "Okay, but you didn't say it like, super clearly," he replied. "I thought it was flexible." Flexible. That word again. My schedule, my commitments, my boundaries, everything's suddenly flexible, as long as it benefited them. The small dismissals piled up like unwashed dishes. They laughed about my old lady routines. They rolled their eyes when I asked them to rinse their plates or wipe the stove. When I mentioned my mother's china, Riley wrinkled her nose. "You know, all this heirloom stuff just weighs you down," she said. "You could sell it and invest in an online course. Imagine how much more expansive your life could be." I looked at the delicate plates my mother had wrapped in newspaper and carried from Ohio to North Carolina, piece by trembling piece. To Riley, they were just old junk. To Evan, increasingly, they looked like assets. I saw it in the way his gaze lingered on anything that might be resold. I began to feel like a guest in my own home. I moved more quietly. I apologized when doors creaked or cabinets clicked shut. Somewhere along the way, I stopped playing music while I cooked. The house, once full of small, ordinary sounds, grew tense and watchful. The worst part wasn't their behavior. It was my response to it. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that they were stressed, that the brand would take off soon and they would move out. I let their needs eclipse my comfort, inch by inch. I told myself I was being generous, supportive, modern. In reality, I was shrinking to fit a space they had already decided was too small for me. At night, lying in my bed under the same blue blanket I had pulled over Evan when he had fevers as a boy, I stared at the hairline crack in the ceiling above my dresser. I had been meaning to patch it for months. Instead, I watched it, the way I watched everything, calculating silently how much more strain it could take before the plaster began to fall. In the quiet, I finally admitted something was bending. When I left the pharmacy that morning, the wind felt sharper than it should have for April. I walked to my car with the receipt crumpled in my fist, the words, "account empty," burned into the back of my eyes. I drove home on autopilot, following streets I knew so well I could have traced them with my eyes closed. My mind circled the same stunned question: how could $14,870 vanish overnight? The driveway looked the same as always when I pulled in. The maple tree in the front yard shook out its new leaves in the breeze. The porch light, which I always leave on when I go out early, still glowed faintly. For a brief, foolish moment I imagined I would walk inside, find Evan at the kitchen table with his laptop, and discover this had all been a ridiculous banking error. The front door was locked. That, at least, was ordinary. I slid my key into the deadbolt, turned it, and pushed the door open. Silence met me. Not the usual, gentle quiet of my home, with the refrigerator humming and floorboards settling. This was a hollow kind of silence, the way a house sounds before anyone has ever lived in it. I stepped into the living room and stopped. The walls were bare. Gone was the oak cabinet Daniel had built by hand, the one that had anchored the room for 30 years. Gone were the rugs we had bought on a trip to Vermont, the ones I used to beat on the porch every spring. My vinyl collection, alphabetized and dusted, had vanished from the shelves. The coffee table where Evan had done homework, played board games, and later balanced his laptop was simply missing, an empty rectangle of lighter wood on the floor where the sun had faded everything around it. I walked farther in, my shoes sounding too loud on the naked floor. The television was gone. The lamps were gone. Even the framed prints I had collected over the years had been taken down, leaving pale ghost rectangles on the paint. Evan? I called. Riley? No answer. In the dining room, the absence hit even harder. The heavy oak table where we had celebrated every birthday, every holiday, every scraped-together weeknight dinner stood, not at all. It was simply not there. Only 4 small dents in the hardwood marked where its legs had once stood. The chairs were gone too. The corner cabinet that had held my mother's china, emptied and removed. My chest tightened. I moved faster now, almost stumbling as I crossed into the kitchen. The toaster, blender, and stand mixer were gone. The microwave had disappeared from the counter, leaving a faint outline of grease. Even the kettle I used every morning was missing. A brittle laugh caught in my throat. Who steals a kettle from the woman who housed and fed them? I opened the pantry. Half the shelves were bare. Bags of rice, pasta, and flour were gone. Canned goods missing. They had even taken the extra paper towels. I went down the hall to the room Evan and Riley had been using. The bed frame remained, but the mattress, blankets, and pillows were missing. The closet was empty, hangers rattling loosely on the rod. They had taken their clothes, their shoes, the ring light Riley used to film videos. The air smelled faintly of her floral perfume and cardboard. A low buzzing began behind my ears. I turned toward the small office where I kept important files. The door was open. The desk drawers hung open too, like a mouth mid-argument. Files lay scattered on the floor where someone had sorted through them in a hurry. My eyes went to the safe in the corner, half concealed behind an old filing cabinet. The metal door stood slightly ajar. I knew, before I even crossed the room, what I would find. Still, my hands shook as I pulled the door wide. Empty. The envelope of emergency cash, $3,000 I had slowly put aside for repairs and true crises, was gone. The small velvet box that had held my mother's jewelry, modest but precious, was gone. Bond certificates, gone. The file containing original documents for the workshop Daniel and I once dreamed of opening, gone. My passport, somehow, remained, as if they had decided even that was more burden than benefit. For a moment, the room tilted. I gripped the side of the desk and waited for the spinning to stop. On the kitchen table, where the morning sun pooled, lay a single sheet of paper. My name was written on top in Evan's quick, careless scrawl. Mom, the note read, we're taking a leap of faith. Riley's brand is finally happening, and Paris is just the beginning. We had to reallocate some resources to make this dream real. Don't worry, we'll replace everything once the money starts flowing in. You'll see, this is an investment in our future. Paris first. At the bottom, his signature. Evan. No apology. No acknowledgement that what he called resources were the things I had spent a lifetime working for, saving for, caring for. No mention of consent. Just a casual promise of replacement, as if my life were a furniture catalog. I sank down onto the bare floor where the dining table used to stand. The wood felt cold through my slacks. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked as the structure adjusted to its new emptiness. I wrapped my arms around myself and listened to my own breathing. My son cleared out my home, I whispered, the words tasting metallic on my tongue. He emptied my bank account and my safe. All for a vacation and a dream that isn't even his. The refrigerator hummed on, indifferent. I did not scream. I did not cry. The pain rose like a tide inside me and then froze, suspended, a silent scream that reached no one. I sat in the middle of my stripped house and realized, with a clarity that hurt, that the boy I had raised did not see me as a person to protect anymore. He saw me as a resource to be mined. Outside, a car passed by, its radio faint through the window. Life went on, ordinary and unaware, while inside my walls, everything familiar had been taken. I felt very alone. I don't remember how long I sat on that floor. At some point my legs went numb and my lower back began to ache, the way it does if I stand too long at the sink. The light shifted across the bare wood, inch by inch, until the patch of sun that had rested where the table once stood crawled away toward the hallway. A practical voice inside me finally spoke up, the same voice that had seen me through every crisis since Daniel died. You can't stay here forever, it said. Get up. Take inventory. Confirm the damage. So I did. I moved through each room slowly, like an inspector after a storm. In the living room, I opened the cabinet where we kept board games. Empty. In the hallway closet, the toolbox was still there, though my good drill was missing. In the bathroom, even my extra bottles of shampoo and lotion were gone. Apparently, nothing was too small to be reallocated. In Evan's old room at the end of the hall, the room that had held bunk beds and science posters once, then later the dull glow of video games, I found a few things they had not bothered to take: a bent math trophy from 8th grade, a shoebox filled with ticket stubs, a faded drawing of a rocket ship labeled with a childish hand, our family going to space. I sat on the edge of the stripped mattress frame and held that drawing for a long moment. 3 stick figures stood under a crooked moon: Dad, Mom, and Evan. All smiling, all connected by lines to the same small house. Beside them, in uncertain letters, he had written, "We go together." I felt something deep inside me harden. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For an instant, hope flared, that maybe the bank had called back, that this was all a misunderstanding they were already rushing to fix. But when I pulled the phone out, it was only a low balance alert, as if the account wanted to remind me again of its emptiness. I opened the banking app anyway. The numbers did not change. $14,870 gone. Multiple transfers labeled authorized. Each one tied to my name, my authorization, to a device registered at my address. That was when the engineer in me finally woke up. I stopped thinking like a mother and started thinking like someone reviewing a compromised structure. You look for patterns. You identify load paths. You determine exactly where the failure began and how far it spread. In my email, I found digital receipts I had never seen, high-end luggage, camera equipment, hotel deposits in Paris, coaching programs with vague titles. All of them routed through my account or credit card. Some were small, $60 or $80. Others were large enough to make me grip the edge of the desk. Each transaction had a date, a time, a neat line of confirmation numbers. Evidence. Then I checked my voicemail. There were 2 messages from my bank. A polite woman's voice said they had noticed unusual activity and needed to verify that I had approved an international purchase. The timestamp was from the previous afternoon, around the time I had been standing at the stove stirring tomato soup, unaware that someone was busy draining my savings from the upstairs bedroom. They had called the house phone first. The line Evan and Riley insisted I didn't need anymore, the one they kept unplugging to reduce noise. When no one answered, they had left a message and, eventually, assumed everything was fine. Everything was not fine. I went to my bedroom, the one space they had mostly left alone, perhaps because there was nothing there they could quickly resell. The bed still stood under the window. My dresser still held folded sweaters, socks, and neatly stacked t-shirts. On top of the dresser sat the same framed photo that had been there for years, Daniel in his work shirt, a much younger me at his side, little Evan perched on his shoulders, all three of us squinting into the sun. In the closet, on the top shelf, was the old wool blanket Daniel had taken on camping trips. Dark green, slightly scratchy, smelling faintly of cedar. I pulled it down, spread it over the bed, and sat on the edge, the weight of it settling around my shoulders. For the first time since I had seen the message at the pharmacy terminal, I allowed myself to say the words out loud. This will not continue. My voice sounded strange in the quiet room, steady, almost calm. Not the wail of a betrayed mother, not the trembling of a frightened woman, but the tone I used once in meetings when I knew a project was about to fail unless someone told the truth. I said it again, slower. This will not continue. Something inside me aligned with those words. The panic that had been fluttering in my chest all morning shifted into something colder, heavier. Not despair. Not exactly anger either. A kind of cold clarity, like the air on a mountaintop where the view is sharp enough to hurt. I realized, sitting there with Daniel's blanket around my shoulders, that my son had crossed a line he might not even believe exists. He had not simply borrowed. He had not made a foolish mistake with a credit card. He had treated my life's work, my savings, my home, my memories, as raw material for his latest experiment. And if I did nothing, I would be the one completing the job for him. I stared at the photograph on the dresser until my eyes stung. The little boy in the picture had trusted me to keep him safe. The man he had become now trusted me to stay quiet. To forgive. To understand. To keep paying. I understood something, right? I understood that every time I had looked the other way, every time I had smoothed over a late bill or a broken promise, I had taught him a lesson about what he could take. I stood up, the blanket slipping down my back, and felt the solid weight of the floor beneath my feet. The house had been stripped, but it still stood. So did I. Enough, I thought. Enough. I did not know exactly what I would do yet. I only knew that whatever came next would not be more of this. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. The sky outside was a flat gray, the kind that precedes sunrise but does not promise warmth. I lay there for one long breath, feeling the weight of Daniel's blanket over me and the heavier weight of what my son had done. Then I sat up, swung my feet to the floor, and began. I have spent my life following procedures. You do not just decide a building is unsafe and walk away, you document, you calculate, you brace. That morning, I treated my life the way I would treat a compromised structure. First, you stop the damage. Then, you reinforce what remains. I made a list in my small spiral notebook, the one I keep for grocery totals and appointment times. The pen moved steadily in my hand, forming a column of actions: bank, credit union, pension office, insurance agent, attorney, locks, security, police. Seeing it in ink calmed me more than any breathing exercise Riley had ever recommended. I dressed in navy slacks and my gray sweater with elbow patches, clothes that made me feel like the professional I had been for years. In the kitchen, I realized again that the kettle was gone, so I heated water in a small pot on the stove and poured it into my cardinal mug. One quiet victory, they had not taken that. At 8 o'clock, I was sitting across from a manager at my primary bank. I slid my identification across the desk, along with the printed statement highlighting the transfers to the travel agency and coaching companies. These transactions are marked as authorized, I said. They were not. My son and his girlfriend accessed my account without my consent. I need all online access shut down immediately and new credentials issued in person. The manager, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a precise bun, studied the papers. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm very sorry this happened. We can't reverse everything, but we can secure what's left. We can also flag any attempts from the devices that made these transfers. Do it, I said. My voice surprised me again, no quaver, no apology. Just instruction. By noon, I had closed every joint account that still had Evan's name on it, some I had almost forgotten existed. An old savings account with a few $100s. A shared credit line I had once opened, in case he needed help starting out. I moved everything I could into a new account at a local bank where only I knew the PIN. From the bank, I drove to the county clerk's office and requested the forms to update my will and power of attorney. The woman behind the glass window slid the packets toward me. You updating beneficiaries? She asked. Yes, I said. Removing one. At home, the house still felt too empty, but now I saw it with different eyes. Not as a museum of what had been taken, but as a site to secure. I called a locksmith and scheduled a same-day visit. I ordered a basic security system with cameras from a company in town. No smart locks, no access codes I would feel pressured to share later. Just deadbolts and clear procedures. While I waited for the locksmith, I sat at the kitchen table, the bare, tableless patch of floor where a table would soon be again, and called my attorney. Mr. Harris had helped Daniel and me draw up our first wills. Now he listened as I explained, in measured sentences, what Evan had done. I am so sorry, Caroline, he said when I finished. You've always been the cautious one. I know this must feel like the ground has shifted. The ground is still here, I replied. I just need to mark off who is allowed to stand on it. He was quiet for a moment. We can revise your will today, he said. Remove Evan as beneficiary, change your executor, and adjust your healthcare directives if you wish. You are under no obligation to leave assets to anyone, including your son. I know, I said. Please draw up documents that reflect that. That afternoon, with new locks already in place and the promise of installation for the cameras the next morning, I drove to his office. I read every line of the revised documents slowly, my engineer's brain catching details most people skim. Evan's name disappeared from paragraph after paragraph, replaced with my niece's names and a small bequest to the local women's shelter. When Mr. Harris handed me the pen to sign, I felt a mix of grief and relief. Signing your child out of your will is a kind of funeral no one prepares you for. But it was also a reinforcement, steel beams added where old wood had rotted. On my way home, I stopped at the police station. At the front desk, I explained that I wanted to file a report for theft and unauthorized use of funds. By a family member, the officer asked, his pen pausing over the form. Yes, I said. By my son and his partner. They removed property from my home without my consent and cleared my account to fund an international trip. I have documentation of the transactions and photographs of the house before and after. The words sounded clinical, but my hands were steady as I slid the folder across the counter. We see more of this than you'd think, he said. You're doing the right thing, ma'am. That night, back in my secure house, I taped the new keys to a small card and wrote the date beside them. I made a second list in my notebook, items to replace, rooms to repair, boundaries to keep. Then I went to the garage. Their remaining belongings were still there, boxes of clothes they had left behind, cheap jewelry displays, bins of ring lights and tripods. Slowly, I packed everything into labeled boxes. I added, to each box, a copy of the bank transactions and receipts they had run through my accounts, highlighted in yellow. A record, in case they ever tried to tell themselves a different story about what had happened here. I stacked the boxes neatly along one wall, ready for retrieval. No drama. No destruction. Just an orderly return of what was theirs, and a quiet, permanent reclaiming of what was mine. They returned 5 days later, just after sunset. I saw them before I heard them, the Uber's headlights washing over the driveway, two silhouettes in the back seat, their laughter floating faintly through the open window. I stood inside the hallway, just out of sight, watching through the frosted glass panel beside the door. They looked sun-warmed and carefree, dragging luxury shopping bags across my porch as if they were souvenirs from some harmless getaway. Evan reached for the doorknob first. The key scraped once, twice. Then a pause. I imagined his confused frown, the moment recognition failed him. He tried again. Metal clicked uselessly. Mom, he called, knocking. Did something happen to the lock? I pressed the intercom button, the new one the locksmith had installed 2 days earlier. You don't live here anymore. There was a beat of stunned silence. Riley leaned closer to the door. What do you mean? She demanded. We live here. This is our home. No, I said. You lived here. Past tense. Evan's voice broke through next, strained, almost boyish. Mom, come on. Just open the door. We're tired, okay? The flight was awful. We'll talk inside. I don't think you need to be inside for this conversation. I opened the garage door using the remote in my pocket. The motion light flicked on, illuminating 2 neat stacks of boxes I had prepared, their clothes, their perfumes, their ring lights, their notebooks full of affirmations about abundance. On top of each stack, the printed bank statements lay face up, highlighted in yellow. Your belongings are in the garage, I said. You can take them now. Riley let out a brittle laugh. Are you serious? Caroline, this is cruel. You can't just throw us out. We don't have anywhere else to go. That is no longer my responsibility. Evan stepped closer to the intercom, his shadow stretching across the porch. Mom, please. We'll fix everything. We'll pay you back. You spent $14,870 of my money, I said calmly. You emptied my safe. You removed property from my home. You didn't ask. You didn't warn me. You didn't even leave me a chair to sit on. He rubbed his forehead, voice rising. You're overreacting. We told you we'd replace everything. You took my husband's cabinet, Evan. You took things you can't replace. Riley scoffed. Ugh, here we go with the sentimental stuff. I didn't respond. Some statements don't deserve replies. After several minutes of arguing between themselves, Riley insisting that I had blocked their energy pathway, Evan muttering that I was being dramatic, they finally gave up. They opened the garage, hauled the boxes to the driveway, and called for 2 Ubers. The drivers helped load the stacks into trunks that barely closed. Riley slammed one door with more force than necessary. I'm going to tell everyone what you did, she yelled toward the house. I'll make sure people know you abandoned us. You're welcome to tell whatever story you choose, I replied through the intercom. I have the paperwork. For a moment, she froze. Then she turned away, shoulders stiff. Evan lingered a little longer. I saw him glance at the windows, as if hoping I might appear and offer him a final reprieve. I didn't. Some choices echo longer when they meet silence. They left separately. Riley's Uber pulled away first, her arms sticking out the window as she filmed herself, probably already crafting a tearful narrative. Evan's car idled for a moment longer before rolling down the street, its taillights shrinking into the dark. 2 days later, my niece sent me a link. Riley had posted a video online titled, Thrown Out by Family, My Story of Survival. Her mascara smudged perfectly, her voice trembling at all the right dramatic moments. She called me controlling, resentful, unstable. She implied I had stolen from them. But my nieces followed up with their own posts, photos of my house stripped bare, screenshots of transactions, timestamps, receipts. The tide shifted quickly. Comments turned. Followers vanished. Brands quietly distanced themselves. Riley's online identity, so carefully manicured, crumbled in a week. As for Evan, I heard pieces of his new life through family trickles. Without access to my accounts, the debts he'd hidden under vague optimism surfaced fast. Riley left him within 2 months, citing misaligned visions for the future. He ended up renting a tiny basement apartment in Pittsburgh, working late-night shifts in the kitchen of a mediocre diner. I didn't rejoice. I didn't wish him harm. But life has a way of returning people to the ground they tried to rise above too quickly. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet around me settling into something peaceful, not the silence of loss, but the silence of reclaimed space. The first morning after they left, the house felt like a shell after the tide goes out. Light came in through bare windows, touching patches of floor that had not seen the sun in years. For a moment, I simply stood in the doorway of the living room, holding my coffee, listening to the quiet. No videos filming. No whispered arguments. No one telling me to lower my voice in my own kitchen. It hurt, and it soothed, all at once. I began with the basics. A week after filing the report and changing the locks, I called a local carpenter about repairing the places where furniture had left scars. He was a soft-spoken man named Louise who measured the empty spaces and said, "We can make this strong again, Ms. Mitchell. Might even make it better." Better. Not the same, but better in its own way. I bought a new dining table from a small shop downtown, nothing as grand as the oak one Daniel built, but solid and simple, with a smooth surface that invited elbows and coffee rings and future conversations. When it was delivered, I ran my hand along its edge, feeling the grain. "Welcome," I said quietly, as if the wood could hear me. It was not a replacement for the old table, it was a marker of a new chapter. Piece by piece, I chose what to bring back in. A second-hand armchair in a soft green fabric. A bookshelf from a neighbor who was downsizing. A modest rug woven in blues and grays that reminded me of the Blue Ridge Mountains at dusk. Every item was paid for in full, with money I controlled. Every receipt had my name on it alone. I repaired the roof, finally. The crew came in early May, their ladders rattling against the siding, their voices drifting in through my open bedroom window. I sat at my desk with a cup of tea and watched them work, feeling a strange kinship with the house. We were both being reinforced where we had been worn thin. With the urgent fixes done, I turned toward the parts of my life that had nothing to do with loss. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. The first evening I walked in, the room smelled of linseed oil and old coffee. Women my age and older sat at easels, laughing softly, their hands already stained with color. I chose a seat by the window. When the instructor told us to paint something that represented home, my brush hovered over the canvas for a long moment. Then I began with a simple line, a roofline, steady and sure. Under it, I painted a single chair by a window and a mug on a table. No people. Just space, waiting. On Saturdays, I joined a women's hiking group that met near the trailheads off the Blue Ridge Parkway. The first time I went, my knees complained, but my lungs filled with the cool, clean air of the mountains. Gravel crunched under our boots as we walked in single file, the trees arching overhead like a silent cathedral. Conversation rose and fell around me, grandchildren, gardens, old marriages, new hobbies. No one knew my story unless I chose to tell it. For once, I was just Caroline, a woman with good boots and a decent walking stick. At home, I created new routines. I played the radio again while I cooked, louder than before if I felt like it. I sang along off-key as I chopped vegetables and stirred soup. I set the thermostat to the temperatures that felt right for my body and my budget and did not apologize to anyone. I left doors open, closed them, moved through every room without announcing myself. Sometimes I caught myself reaching for the second mug, the extra plate, the reflexive thought, I should save this for Evan. Each time, I set one plate back in the cabinet and reminded myself, gently, that I was allowed to be the center of my own life now. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail with an unfamiliar return address. Inside was a photograph I had never seen before, Daniel and me at the county fair, years ago, Daniel laughing with his head thrown back, my cheeks smudged with powdered sugar from funnel cake, little Evan between us holding a cheap stuffed bear. On the back, in Evan's uneven handwriting, were 7 words. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm trying to change. There was more, a short paragraph about his job at the diner, about meetings with a counselor, about missing me. No requests for money, no vague promises of greatness. Just small, clumsy sentences. I stood at the kitchen counter, the new table behind me, the repaired roof above me, and read it twice. Then I placed the photograph on the mantel, beside the older one of the 3 of us at the lake. I did not call. I did not write back. Love does not disappear overnight, even when trust does. But loving someone does not mean handing them the keys to your life again. My house is not full yet, and maybe it never will be. There are empty spaces where certain things used to stand, both in my rooms and in my heart. I have made peace with that. Some spaces are meant to stay open, to let the light in. I sit here, quietly, breathing, and go on. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit at my new dining table with the lamp on low and listen to the house breathe. The refrigerator hums, the floor settles, a car passes now and then on the street outside. For the first time in a long time, I recognize the quiet as mine. It is not the silence of being ignored in my own home. It is the stillness of finally being respected by the one person who used to ignore me most, myself. I did not arrive here through bravery that looks good in stories. I arrived one decision at a time, with shaking hands and a clear head. People assume the worst pain comes from strangers, from obvious enemies. They are wrong. The deepest cut is the quiet realization that someone you carried, fed, protected, and defended has chosen to see you as an obstacle or an account number instead of as a human being. I spent years smoothing over Evan's mistakes, interpreting his choices in the kindest light, telling myself he just needed time. In doing so, I taught him that I would always make room for him, no matter how much he pushed me toward the edge. Loving him never was the mistake. Forgetting that I also had a right to love myself was. I do not know what his future holds. Maybe he will truly change. Maybe he will build a decent, steady life in that small apartment, clocking out from night shifts with the smell of frying oil in his hair. Maybe he will fall in love again with someone who requires him to stand on his own feet instead of on another person's back. I hope, quietly, that he does. But hope is not the same as opening my door. Forgiveness, when it comes, will have its own shape. It does not have to look like a spare key. What I know is this: I have stopped auditioning for the role of good mother in a play that demands I disappear. I have paid enough. I have explained enough. I have given enough. Strength, I have learned, is not shouting, not throwing anyone's clothes into the street, not dramatic speeches. Strength is sitting with a pen in your hand while your heart hurts and signing the paper anyway. Strength is the click of a new deadbolt, the first night you sleep without waiting for someone else's footsteps in the hallway. If you are listening to this and feeling that sharp, secret recognition in your chest, I want you to know you are not cruel for wanting peace. You are not selfish for wanting your own room, your own account, your own thoughts. It is not betrayal to stop funding your own erosion. Quiet choices count. Small boundaries count. Changing a lock, saying no to a transfer, refusing to be insulted in your own kitchen, these things may never be applauded, but they will keep you standing when other structures fall. My house is not perfect. Neither am I. There are scuff marks on the walls and places where the paint does not match. There are memories that still sting if I look at them too closely. But every morning the light comes in through windows I paid for, across floors I chose, onto a life I am rebuilding at a pace that fits my lungs. I belong here. And if this touched a nerve, you belong here too. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength. Maybe one day, years from now, I will sit across from Evan in a quiet cafe, 2 adults with the same eyes, and we will speak honestly about the distance between who we were and who we became. Maybe we will not. Life does not owe me that scene. What it has given me, instead, is something quieter and surprisingly heavy in the hand, the knowledge that I can survive the loss of the version of my child I once held in my mind. I can love him from a distance and still lock my door at night. I can remember the boy without surrendering my safety to the man. That knowing is not dramatic, but it is mine, and it will carry me through more evenings at this table, under this roof, in this life I chose to keep. I hope, if nothing else, that he someday understands this truth. I did not close the door to punish him. I closed it to keep myself alive. In the weeks that followed, I learned how a life can steady itself once the noise is gone. I woke without bracing for anyone's footsteps, and the house felt lighter, almost relieved. Most mornings I walked the quiet loop behind my street, breathing in the pine-scented air and letting my thoughts settle into something calm. I made small meals, set one plate at the new table, and discovered that food tastes different when no one is arguing nearby. In the evenings I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and watched the sky turn lavender. Sometimes a neighbor waved, sometimes no one passed at all. I found comfort in that steady stillness, knowing it was mine to choose. Healing, I realized, isn't dramatic. It's a slow returning to yourself, a gentle rebuilding of trust in your own hands and judgment. Each quiet day reminded me that I had not lost my strength. I had simply stopped hearing it under all the noise. As the weeks passed, I stopped replaying the moment they left. Instead, I began planning small things, a drive on the parkway, a book to read, a class to try. My life had not vanished with what they took, it had simply waited for me to claim it again. And I kept going on.